I've been told that hindsight is a cruel gift. You see everything so clearly once it's already too late to matter. I know that now. I've known it for a while, actually. But knowing something and truly accepting it are two very different things, and for most of last autumn, I was still in the space between those two. My name is Dorothy. I'm 63 years old. I live in a townhouse in Oakville, Ontario, a short drive from the lake, where the streets are lined with old maples that turn the most heartbreaking shade of red every October. I have 2 grown children, a garden that I love more than most people give me credit for, and until 8 months ago, a husband of 31 years named Gerald. I want to tell you what happened. Not because I need sympathy, I've had plenty of that from my sister and my neighbor Paulette, who has brought me more butter tarts than any one woman should consume in a lifetime. I want to tell you because I think some of you will recognize pieces of this story as your own, and if you do, I hope what I chose to do with mine gives you something useful to hold on to. Gerald worked in project management for a mid-sized engineering firm based in Mississauga. He'd been with the company for nearly 2 decades. Steady, dependable work, good pension, good benefits. We never worried about money the way some of our friends did. We had the house paid off, the children through university, and a trip to Portugal we'd been planning for our 35th anniversary. That was still 2 years away but already half researched in a folder on my laptop. I should tell you that Gerald was not, on the surface, what you'd imagine when you picture a man who does what he did. He was not cold, he was not distant. He laughed at bad jokes, he remembered birthdays, he drove me to my rheumatology appointments without being asked. For most of our marriage, I would have described him as a genuinely good man. That description is the thing I've had to revise most painfully. The changes came slowly, the way most damage does. He started working later. Not dramatically late, not midnight, nothing that would have set off an alarm but an extra hour here, an extra 2 hours there. He began attending more team events, which I had no reason to question because the firm had always been social in that way. There were golf tournaments in the summer and holiday dinners in December, and the occasional Friday afternoon that stretched into an evening. None of it was unusual on its own. It was only when I laid it all out together, the way you might arrange pieces of a puzzle on a table before you understand what you're looking at, that the shape of it became clear. I started noticing in August. We were sitting on the back porch after dinner, and he was on his phone, which wasn't unusual, but something about the angle of it bothered me. The way he tilted the screen, the way he set it face down when he refilled his coffee. Gerald had never been a person who hid his phone. We'd always been open that way. Not because we had any formal agreement about it, but because neither of us had ever had reason to be secretive. The face-down phone was such a small thing. Such a ridiculous, tiny thing. But it lodged itself in my chest like a splinter and would not come out. I didn't say anything. I'm not by nature a confrontational person. I was raised in a household in Burlington, where you did not make accusations without evidence, where you thought carefully before you spoke, where dignity was considered more important than being right. So I watched. I paid attention in a way I hadn't needed to for 30 years. And the more I paid attention, the more I found. He started going to the gym on Saturday mornings, which was new. Gerald had not voluntarily exercised since our son's hockey league folded in 2009. He bought 2 new dress shirts in September, which he told me were for client meetings. He stopped asking about my book club. Not in an obviously checked-out way, but in the way of a person whose attention has relocated somewhere else and only occasionally remembers to come back. By October, I was almost certain. I didn't have proof, but certainty and proof are different currencies, and I had accumulated enough of the first that the second felt almost like a formality. What I was missing was a name, a face, something real I could hold. The annual company appreciation dinner was scheduled for the 3rd Friday of October. Gerald had mentioned it weeks in advance, which was itself slightly unusual. He'd never been one to announce these things. The event was being held at a hotel in downtown Toronto, one of those renovated heritage buildings near King Street, with the kind of lobby that makes you feel underdressed just walking through it, black tie optional. Spouses and partners welcome. Though Gerald had told me he thought I'd find it boring and that I shouldn't feel obligated to attend. That was the sentence that confirmed everything I already suspected. I told him I was going to spend the weekend at my daughter's place in Hamilton. She'd just had her 2nd baby in June and always needed an extra set of hands, which was true. I did visit often. Gerald seemed genuinely relieved, which I noted and filed away. I kissed him goodbye on Friday afternoon and drove in the opposite direction of Hamilton. I had called the hotel the week before. I'd spoken to the banquet coordinator, a pleasant woman named Christine, and told her I was a freelance event photographer looking to connect with venues for future work. I asked if they ever brought in outside photographers for corporate events. She mentioned they sometimes did, especially for larger bookings where the in-house staff was stretched. I told her I'd heard the engineering firm's event that Friday was quite a production and asked if they needed a second shooter. She checked, made a call, and called me back the next day. Apparently, the firm's designated photographer had canceled. Would I be available? I said I would. I am not, to be clear, a professional photographer. I took a continuing education course at Sheridan College 7 years ago when I thought I might like to do portraits of grandchildren. I have a decent camera, a Canon that my husband gave me for Christmas the year I turned 56, and I know how to use it well enough that I look like I know what I'm doing. That was all I needed. I dressed carefully. I wore my hair up. I put on my glasses, the wire-rimmed ones I usually only wear for reading, and a plain black blazer over dark trousers. I looked professional and unremarkable, which was exactly the point. When you are 63 years old and carrying a camera with a long lens, people look right through you. That is something younger women don't yet understand about becoming invisible in a crowd. I have learned to use it. I arrived at the hotel at 6:15. The dinner wasn't starting until 7, but photographers arrive early. I introduced myself to the events manager, collected my lanyard, and spent 45 minutes moving through the room as the guests arrived, taking establishing shots of the centerpieces and the bar setup and the view of the CN Tower through the floor-to-ceiling windows. I was calm. I was focused. My hands were steady in a way I hadn't expected them to be. I saw him come in at 7:20. Gerald was wearing the charcoal suit I'd helped him pick out 3 Christmases ago. He looked well. He always looked well at these things, comfortable in a room full of people in a way that I'd always admired about him. He was laughing at something the man beside him had said. That easy, open laugh that I had fallen in love with in 1992 at a dinner party in a Scarborough apartment that neither of us had any business being at. She was with him. I knew her before I had a name for her. I knew her the way you know something your body has understood before your mind has caught up. She was younger, not scandalously younger, perhaps early 40s, which made the whole thing somehow more ordinary and therefore more devastating. She had dark hair cut to her shoulders, and she was wearing a burgundy dress that was appropriate for the occasion, but had clearly been chosen with care. She walked beside Gerald with the relaxed familiarity of someone who had stood beside him in many rooms before this one, not touching him, not obviously, but close, in that invisible fence way that people use when they have agreed, without words, to perform a certain kind of distance that neither of them quite believes. I lifted my camera. I took the photograph. I spent the next 2 hours doing my job. I photographed the cocktail hour, the seating arrangements, the speeches that preceded dinner. I moved through the room with a purpose that kept anyone from looking at me too closely or too long. I photographed Gerald 3 more times in that window, always from a distance, always as part of a larger frame. I photographed her twice, once at the bar, ordering what looked like sparkling water, and once in conversation with a group near the windows, laughing at something, her hand resting for just a moment on the forearm of the woman beside her, in a way that was perfectly normal and had nothing to do with my husband at all. It was during the dinner service, somewhere between the salad course and the main, that I heard it. I was standing near the service entrance, reviewing images on the camera's display screen, when a man at the table nearest me stood and raised his glass. He was one of those people who had clearly had enough wine to feel that a spontaneous toast was a good idea. His voice was loud and good-natured, and carried across the table with the confidence of someone who thought everyone found him as charming as he found himself. "I'm going to take a moment," he said, "because I think this deserves acknowledging. Some of you may have already heard, but I want to raise a glass to 2 people at this table who have made it very official. To Gerald and Carolyn. We all knew it was coming. When's the wedding, you two?" The table laughed and applauded. A few people from adjacent tables looked over, smiling in that mildly curious way of people who have caught the edge of someone else's celebration. I stood very still. Gerald was smiling. That particular smile, the private, pleased one, the one I used to think was only for me. The woman in the burgundy dress. Carolyn was shaking her head with performed embarrassment, the kind that isn't really embarrassed at all. I looked down at my camera. My hands were still steady. I found that strange and also clarifying. I want to tell you that what I felt in that moment was rage. It would make for a better story, perhaps. But what I felt was something much quieter and much worse. It was the sensation of a very long truth arriving at last, after a very long journey. It was grief that had been waiting patiently in a room just off stage and had simply, finally been let in. I took the photograph of them, both of them, mid-laugh, glasses raised, the kind of photograph that documents a moment completely. I kept working. I shot the rest of the dinner service, the dessert course, the executive remarks that closed the evening. I was professional. I was composed. People thanked me as they passed, and I smiled and said it had been a lovely event, which it had been objectively, in the way that a very sharp thing can also be very beautiful. I found Gerald near the coat check at the end of the evening. He saw me from across the room and his face did something I had never seen it do before. It went completely still. I walked toward him slowly. Carolyn was beside him. She had not yet seen me. She was looking at her phone. "Gerald," I said. He said my name the way you say a word when you're not sure it's the right word anymore. Quietly, with a question in it. "I've been here all evening," I said. "I've been taking photographs." Carolyn looked up. I watched him understand. It moved across his face like weather. "Dorothy," he began. "Not here," I said. "Not tonight. This isn't the place, and I'm not going to give you a scene." I looked at him carefully. At this man I had driven to the airport 47 times, whose mother I had sat with in a Brampton hospital for the last 6 days of her life, whose children I had raised with my whole body and my whole heart. I just wanted you to know that I know. I wanted to look at you and say that so there's no room for you to tell me later that I didn't understand or that I imagined it. He said nothing. I thanked Christine from the events team on my way out. I drove myself to my daughter's in Hamilton, arrived after 11, let myself in with my key, and sat at her kitchen table for a very long time without turning on the lights. I told my daughter the next morning. She sat across from me with her tea going cold and said, "Mom, how are you this calm?" And I told her the truth, which was that I wasn't calm at all, but that I had spent 31 years learning the difference between feelings that need an audience and feelings that need a witness, and right now I just needed her. In the weeks that followed, I made a lot of phone calls. I spoke to a lawyer in Burlington who had been recommended to me by Paulette, who knew these things because she had been through her own version of this 11 years earlier. The lawyer's name was Margaret, and she was direct and thorough and did not once look at me with pity, which I appreciated deeply. Ontario's family property laws meant that the division of assets, after a marriage of our length, would be a significant and careful process. The house in Oakville, the RRSPs, the defined benefit pension Gerald had built over 20 years, all of it would require proper accounting. Margaret helped me understand what I was entitled to and what the process would realistically look like. It was not fast. It was not simple. But it was knowable, and knowing it helped. Gerald moved out in November. He went to stay with his brother in Etobicoke, which I thought was appropriate and slightly poetic, since his brother had been covering for him in small ways for longer than I'd known, and I imagine a certain debt was being repaid. We communicated through lawyers for the first 2 months, which was painful in a way that was also, I'll admit, a relief. There was no pretending to have conversations we weren't capable of having. We spoke directly for the first time in January. He called from his brother's house on a Sunday afternoon and I answered because I had decided before he called that I would. He apologized. The apology was real and also insufficient, which is the nature of apologies for things that can't be undone. I told him I accepted it, because I did, and also because holding the alternative would cost me more than it would cost him, and I have never been interested in paying prices that belong to someone else. I sold the Portugal trip folder. Not literally, but I deleted it from my laptop on a Tuesday evening in February while a pot of soup was on the stove. I made myself a full bowl of it, sat at the kitchen table with the news on low, and ate the whole thing. I have started volunteering at the library in town on Wednesday mornings. I help with the adult literacy program, sitting with people who are learning to read later in life for reasons as varied and as complicated as human beings are. There is a man there, 68 years old, originally from Eritrea, who is learning English well enough now to read simple chapter books. Last week he brought in a book his granddaughter had picked for him, a story about a fox who learns to trust a wolf, and he read me 2 pages of it, slowly and carefully, and then looked up with an expression on his face that I can only describe as the look of someone who has just acquired a new kind of power. I thought about Gerald for a moment, and then I didn't. There is a version of this story where I fell apart. I won't pretend it didn't visit me, that version. There were nights last November when the house was very quiet and very large, and I sat with things I don't intend to describe here because they belong to me and not to anyone else. But I made a decision very early in all of this, that I was not going to become a person defined by what had been done to me, that the 31 years were real, that they counted, that the life we'd made together had genuine worth, and also that what came after was mine, to shape as I chose. I am 63 years old. I have a garden that is going to be extraordinary this spring because I ordered bulbs in February that I've never tried before, tulips in a shade called Queen of Night that are supposed to be almost black. I have a daughter in Hamilton with 2 babies who smell like everything good in the world. I have a son in Vancouver who calls me every Sunday and who makes me laugh harder than anyone I know. I have Paulette next door, and her endless butter tarts, and her particular brand of wisdom that only comes from having survived your own version of the worst thing. I have the photographs from that evening in October. I haven't deleted them. Not out of bitterness, I'm not a bitter woman, or I'm trying very hard not to be. I keep them because they remind me that I walked into that room with a plan, that I kept my hands steady, that I saw clearly and acted with intention, that I did not fall apart in a hotel lobby when every part of me wanted to. That is the thing no one tells you about the moment everything changes. It doesn't always arrive as a collapse. Sometimes it arrives as a very quiet decision to remain yourself, to choose the truth, even when it costs you something that has shaped your entire adult life. To walk out of a hotel on King Street on a Friday night in October and drive yourself to your daughter's house and sit in a dark kitchen and hold your own grief with both hands and not let it become something uglier than it needs to. Bae. You are the author of what happens next, even when you didn't write the chapter that came before. That's the thing I know now that I didn't know before all of this. And if you are sitting somewhere right now holding your own version of a face-down phone, your own version of a Saturday morning gym, your own version of a trip to Portugal in a folder on your laptop, I am not telling you what to do. Only that clarity, when it finally comes, is something you can survive. That you can hold a camera steady, even when your heart is doing something entirely different. That you can walk out of the room with your dignity intact. I walked out of the room. I'm still walking. And I'll tell you honestly, the view from here, though it wasn't the one I planned on, is something I'm learning to see as mine.